Welcome back to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. Today we're going to be talking about resilience. Yes, resilient minds. So how you can have and generate a resilient mind in 2023 and go forth with that mental toughness that we talk about and how to bounce back. So we're going to be sharing some tips, or I'm going to be sharing some tips because I'm your guest today. I'm Anthony. Yes, I'm going to be sharing tips on how to create a resilient mind. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about what is stress and resilience. So we're going to define the topics, and then we're going to talk about how they serve us and how to navigate stress, how to create resilience, and how to stay and maintain resilience in terms of mindsets and stay in that in that zone of, no matter what comes at you, you'll certainly absorb it or bounce back. And so that's what we're going to be sharing today. Well, I'm going to be sharing. I've got to get rid of this we. It's I today. So yes, you've got me, and looking forward to enhancing and enlightening your well-being. So let's get started. So let's talk about what is stress. So it's essentially when you perceive more challenge than support. It's a survival mechanism to get us going, to get us towards our prey, or to get us away from a predator. So essentially when we're out, back in the day, when we were out looking for prey, we would also encounter predators. And in the pursuit of prey, we would then perceive that there's more benefits than drawbacks of getting that prey, in a sense that it would feed us and nourish the family. And then the predator came into the picture, then we'd want to then use all our resources to get away from that predator. So in that survival mode, essentially, when we're seeking prey and avoiding predator, essentially we're in that, that challenge and support imbalance. Essentially, we have more challenge to get the prey so we don't starve, and the challenge to get away from the predator so we live, essentially. And so in that moment, we perceive that there's certainly way more upside in terms of getting away from the predator, or way more upside in terms of getting the prey, and we're driven in that direction to get that. And essentially that happens in everyday life, where we are given a task at work and we perceive, well, that's a challenging deadline. Oh, how am I going to meet that? Do I have the resources and time to facilitate to meet that deadline? And that starts to create that stress response in your body, and it starts driving you towards meeting that deadline. So yes, stress is, you can't certainly label stress as bad, right? It serves its purpose. And so there is a benefit in having that stress. It really gets us up and going. It gets us going towards goals and achieving goals. It is the unmanaged stress that doesn't serve us well. It's essentially when stress is out of control, like we're constantly running away from that predator forever. We're just running away from life, trying to avoid challenges. We're running away from those people that we don't like and hoping they don't pop up anywhere in our lives. Or we're seeking something that we really want, such as we indulging in food, that's our prey. Or we're indulging in another person we're infatuated over. We just can't get enough of them. They're constantly occupying our mind and our life. And essentially that is us driven towards getting more of it. So it can certainly drive those addictions as well, because we get that dopamine hit when we get that reward, if we get it. So stress is, in a sense, it serves us in terms of it gets us going, gets us, chasing goals and being ambitious and having that drive and that really propulsion forward, right? But it's the unmanaged stress that we don't want. We don't want the distress. So the distress comes about when we perceive there's way more challenge than support. Okay, there's an imbalance there, and we can't see the end in mind. We can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Essentially, that results in distress. Our body's constantly thinking, well, I just got to keep running away because this predator's just there all the time. It's constantly with me. It's constantly with me at nighttime. I feel threatened by these targets, these deadlines, and potentially losing my job if I don't meet these targets or deadlines? So absolutely, it can serve us, but unmanaged, if it goes unchecked, unmanaged, and you don't get the support, then that challenge will result in distress. And essentially, that distress results in illness and all sorts of physical illnesses in terms of not being able to digest food is one of the manifestations of being overly stressed, not being able to sleep at night, very emotional, very erratic in terms of responses, very angry and frustrated and irritable, a typically emotional response when you're under too much stress or duress or distress. Okay, so that's how it might physically manifest. Or the digestive, like you're not digesting food, you're getting bloating, it just sits there, it's not going through. You can get constipation, or it can go through too quickly. You might get diarrhea. So that's physical symptoms that we're not coping. The mental aspect of not coping is we withdraw. Essentially, we start to avoid it. We think, well, I'm not getting anywhere, I'm going to avoid that deadline, or I may deflect the blame and start blaming others and not take responsibility. I might go, just express unusual behavior that is not typically you or not typically me. So, and people, given that everyone's different, they're going to express that behavioral change differently. Okay. So essentially, when our expectations of life is far greater than reality, that is also stressful. Okay. Because the world that we hoped it would be is not the way we hoped it would be. And that, exaggerated expectations of the way the world should be, and the reality is just not showing you what you want to see, then that it can result in distress. So obviously, shifting your expectations can also help reduce the stress. So if your expectations of the way the world ought to be, and it's just not that, then you might need to call a reality check on yourself and ask yourself the questions: have you got, I guess, unrealistic expectations upon others or upon yourself? You could be doing this to yourself. You may be putting unrealistic expectations on yourself in terms of what you can accomplish in a day, and that results in stress. Oh, I'm not good enough. I didn't achieve all my deadlines at the end of the day. That can result in that. And then you start beating yourself up in the evening in terms of negative self-talk. So again, a reality check as to, are you setting yourself up for failure by overcommitting? Do you have exaggerated expectations of how others, when what they should do? They're going to be them, and they're going to behave accordingly to what fulfills them. And you can't expect them to then want to just do everything according to what you want. Okay. So then those unrealistic expectations upon others can be distressful for you, because you essentially want them to behave in a particular way and they're not. They're being themselves. Okay. So that can result in distress. Okay. So when we have unrealistic expectations, either of ourselves or others, that's distressful. Unrealistic expectations of the world in terms of the way it should be, in terms of sunny weather and it's raining, or there's war in some parts of the world or whatever, and it should just be peaceful. Everything should be peaceful. Well, that's again an unrealistic expectation on the way the world should be. Again, you need to have a reality check. There is peace and conflict throughout the war, and there's a balance of peace and conflict. One goes with the other. It's the same as pain and pleasure. They go together. So if you accept both sides of life, then it's going to be, you're going to find a much more rhythm, much more alignment, and much more gratitude, because you can only be grateful for seeing things as they are. How can you be, otherwise you'd be forever ungrateful, because you'll be always looking for harmony and peace, and you see war. And it's because you're essentially one-sided in you're looking for peace and harmony. And I actually interviewed Udo Erasmus, and we recently we spoke about his expertise around fats, but he shared one of his stories, and he basically left Poland as a refugee, and he was, disbanded, or basically an orphan as a result of that, leaving Poland in World War II, and lost track of mom and his siblings and whatnot, and that then sent him on a quest to look for harmony, because it was extremely unharmonious when he was growing up, right? He was forced to flee from his country due to war, and it resulted in the breakdown of the family unit. They became separated. And in his quest for harmony, he actually realized that there is harmony. He just was looking too much for it and was seeing too much of disharmony, right? So essentially, there is, and it depends on how you want to look at the world, and your perception of the world is in terms of what you'll see. So he was looking for harmony and expecting harmony everywhere, and he was focused on seeing war and thinking, well, why it should be harmonious, it should be peaceful, and therefore I guess the thoughts to him was, that harmony's just not there, but it is. It's all around him all the time. It just that he was too fixated and one-sided in what he was looking for. And so you need to embrace two sides. And that is the reality check. So, and that will help with so when you have unrealistic expectations in terms of you only love one side of one person, like you like them when they do this, but you don't like them when they do that, that's not loving them for who they are. It's not loving them for the whole being. And therefore, how can you provide, love is unconditional, right? But you're putting a condition on your love. You'll only love them if they do this or behave like this. And when they do the opposite, you don't love them. And therefore you're dishonoring them as a human. Love is unconditional. Gratitude is actually being grateful for who they are. And regardless of if you like this or dislike that, it's loving the whole. And that's essentially, if we, again, looking at the world, we need to love the whole. We need to, there's obviously parts of the world that are in harmony and no conflict, and there's other parts that are in conflict. But that is the balance. That is the balanced perspective, is that there's harmony and conflict at the same time. It's the same as pain and pleasure. So there's always so it's pleasurable for me in pursuit of my dreams, which is to enhance and enlighten the well-being of my listeners. However, I do encounter, it could be perceived as pain on that journey. It's a lot of work, right? I don't perceive it as pain, but other people may perceive it as pain. I essentially spend at least a minimum of 1 day a week on this podcast. It doesn't bring any money in for me. I mean, it may in the future, but it certainly doesn't at the moment. So I'm investing time, investing money into developing this podcast. I enjoy it because I am enhancing, enlightening the well-being of others. I'm passing on knowledge and expertise to better your life and to support you. And that helps fulfill me. And so it's, again, there's a bit of pain in terms of the investment and constantly putting money in and not getting any in return. However, because I'm fulfilling what's important to me, it can also be perceived as pleasurable in that pursuit. So again, in that pursuit, I experience both pleasure and pain, but I embrace both of them because I know it's part of the growing journey. And if I'm not experiencing pain, I'm not growing. And so this is the same with stress. Stress brings in challenge. Challenge helps us grow. That challenge may be perceived by you as pain. That person, what they're doing, you might perceive that as painful. However, it is providing some challenge for you and enabling you to grow. And so that's what essentially how you want to perceive the challenge in your life. Is it an opportunity to grow and to move to the next level of, I guess, conscious awareness. So really elevating your thinking, really going up in terms of your level of consciousness and getting that full consciousness. We can only have full consciousness is when we see both sides. If we're one-sided, then that's not full consciousness. That's very much, as I said before, that's survival thinking. I just need to get away from that prey. Or I need to get away from that predator. So I run this way. I need to get that prey. So I run towards, that's just one-sided. I have to go in one direction. To get away from the predator, I'm running the opposite way. To get the prey, I'm running with it and hopefully run faster. And essentially that's very one-sided, isn't it? We're just seeking one side. I just want the prey, or I just want to get away from the predator. As you go up in your elevation of thinking, and we're going to discuss this a whole lot more, essentially you are starting to get a consciousness of both sides. And that's what I've been sharing thus far, is that the complementary opposites is what you need to embrace in order to get full consciousness and full awareness and elevated thinking. And that's where essentially you'll experience gratitude and love, because you see things for what they are as opposed to the way you want them to be. And you can also love them unconditionally, because you place no conditions around that event or that person. Essentially, you love them for who they are, the whole being, not half them, the whole of them. And you love the event for the whole event, as opposed to just loving one side of that event. So that is full consciousness, that's elevated thinking, and that is where resilience lies, okay? That is essentially when your autonomic system is perfectly balanced. So when I mentioned before, in terms of that fight or flight response, getting away from the predator or needing to get that prey, otherwise I'll starve, that essentially drives the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system response. And then when you get the prey and you eat it, that switches on the parasympathetic, but it's one or the other, right? When we see events for what they are, as opposed to how they should be, essentially we see the balance and the order, okay? And in that moment, our nervous system is completely balanced. It's neither one side or the other. It's completely aligned. And that's when we essentially become ageless, okay? It's incredible. It's essentially where our body can start to heal, because it's in a balanced state. It can start to heal itself. And so this episode, although I'm talking about resilience, it also leads to wellness, okay? And essentially, any expression of illness is just letting you know you're out of balance. You have an imbalanced perspective of something, or of many things. And you need to do some work in terms of balancing that perspective to see the whole picture, as opposed to one side of the event or one side of that person. Okay, we want to see the whole, then we can love the whole, we can be grateful for the whole. We have complete balance nervous system, and that's when we achieve wellness, and we're in a state of wellness, and we're not aging. Essentially, how brilliant is that? We age when we have imbalanced perspectives and our autonomic nervous system is shifted to one side. Okay, it's designed to swing to both sides and swing in a balanced way. It's not designed to be shifted one side. So if you're constantly in challenge and don't perceive the support, and you're constantly in distress, your sympathetic nervous system switched on, and that's one-sided, right? And that will result in illness, in disease, symptomatic profiles physically expressing themselves. And essentially, it's just letting you know that you have an imbalanced perspective, okay? And we need to shift that sympathetic nervous system back into balance. So it's essentially like your body can then heal itself. So, and that is the state of eustress, is when we're in complete alignment. Okay, we're living a life aligned to our values. We see the world for as it is, as opposed to as it should be. We can love one another for who they are, as opposed to just loving one side of them. And that results in eustress. And that is the stress that will result in wellness. So eustress is wellness generating. Distress is illness generating. Okay, so if you want, I'm sure you don't want, you don't have any desire for distress. And essentially, you want that state of eustress, which is wellness promoting, as opposed to illness promoting, which is distress. And that's what this episode's about, is to help you see a balanced perspective, to get your autonomic system aligned and balanced, and so that it can swing accordingly to when it needs to. And that's when you achieve heart rate variability. So you might have heard of HRV, heart rate variability. Essentially, we want that to be high, and that's essentially is our body in the most adaptive state to whatever's coming, external stressor. And so that is resilience, is an adaptive state to the environment, to what comes our way. We're able to adapt quickly, okay, to it. And your best and the best state of mind to be adaptive is that balanced mindset, that balanced perspective. And essentially you're then able to adapt to all sorts of situations because you can see the whole, as opposed to just seeing it for one side. Okay, so I hope that helps. So essentially, in terms of defining stress, there's two forms of stresses. There's distress, and that's when we have unrealistic expectations of others, or unrealistic expectations of ourselves, or an unrealistic expectation of the world, versus the reality. Okay, the greater that gap between unrealistic expectations and reality is the greater distress. That's when our body's going to be really under a lot of stress, and it's going to be one-sided stressed. It's going to be extremely sympathetic in terms of fight, flight, or freeze, or you may just give up on the world and it'll be extremely parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. And both of them at their extremes and not balancing results in illness. So distress is illness promoting, and that's as a result of extremity perceptions, or all or nothing thinking the world should be one this way, and it's, and you realize it's not. And that is illness promoting. And the ultimate form of degeneration in terms of illness is cancer. And so the longer the all or nothing or the one-sided perspective resides in your life, the higher the chances of getting an illness like cancer. It's regression of cells, essentially, back to the primitive format of the cell. Okay. Eustress is when we have a balanced perception. We see things for the whole, for the way they are, as opposed to wanting them to be something else. We see people for as they are, and we love them for the whole them, not the one-sided them. That is when we have complete gratitude for the people in our lives. We have love. We have complete unconditional love, not conditioned based on someone behaving in a certain way. Or, you could have that condition on yourself, or you only love half of yourself. You love this about you, but you don't like this about you. And therefore, that's having conditional love on yourself. And that results in that essentially, putting self-depreciating thoughts, so not valuing you and not valuing the whole you. You're essentially depreciating you and having negative thoughts and that whole process, which will result, again, in distress and illness. So eustress will result as having a balanced perspective, will result when you perceive support and challenge being equal, and that will enable you to grow and thrive. Okay, you'll grow and thrive and become a better version of you as you obviously shift your perceptions, and you can love people for who they are. You can see grace in what's happened, and you can express more gratitude. As you express more gratitude, you'll be grateful for more things. You have more things to be grateful for because you appreciate things for as they are. You appreciate people for who they are, as opposed to one-sided. So I hope that really clears up as to what's distress and what's eustress. Okay, two forms of stress. your pursuit is for eustress, okay? And you want to move away from distress. And this podcast is to help you to do that. It's going to enable that progression, that elevated thinking. So, what is resilience? Again, I touched on this a bit earlier. It is the ability to adapt to a changing environment. I mentioned having high heart rate variability. That means you're in a resilient state. You can adapt to whatever comes at you. If you have low heart rate variability, then that's when you're in that fight or flight, that one-sided perspective of the world. You're running away from the tiger, or you're chasing the prey, whatever that prey is for you. That pursuit is just one-sided, okay? And as a result, you have a nervous system that's operating in the extreme side and not in a balanced way, or not being able to swing clearly between the two sides, because you just want that prey and you just want it so bad, or you just want to get away from that enemy or the person you dislike so much, and you just want them out of your world. That one-sided thinking results in the distress, results in a lower heart rate variability, results in lower ability to be resilient and adaptive to changing circumstances. So if you're already distressed and some more stress, a different form of stress comes into your life, then essentially you're unable to cope with additional stress, because your body's already in a state where it's struggling to cope with the existing form of stress. Okay? So it's really important that you work towards having that resilient mindset. And that resilient mindset is, again, seeing life as it is, as opposed to the way, an unrealistic expectation of the way it should be, that you impose on the world. Seeing it for as it is, seeing people for who they are, and loving them for the whole. That is wellness promoting. That is a state of eustress, and essentially a higher heart rate variability, better adaptive to stressors, additional stressors that come into your life. Okay, so I hope that paints the picture well of the types of stresses and resilience, how to be adaptive. And essentially the best adaptive state is where, in that heightened level of thinking, which we're going to get into a bit more detail shortly, it's order to thinking. It's elevated thinking. It's that survival thinking, which I mentioned before, which was that seeking prey, trying to get away from predator, that mentality, right? That is order one thinking, okay? And essentially, this episode is to help lift you out of order one thinking. If you're in that fight or flight and not coping with today's stress, or you have a one-sided perspective of the world, or one-sided perspective of your partner or a loved one, or your mom or dad, brother or sister, whoever, sibling, then this is essentially going to be a starting enabler to help you see both sides and love both sides of the person or the event. Okay, so let's get into it. This is exciting. I'm even getting excited talking about it. Isn't that awesome? So essentially, as I mentioned before, I just want to reiterate, stress it shouldn't be labeled as bad. It's depending, okay? It really depends, okay? So it can result in distress when we perceive more challenge than support, okay? Or we have unrealistic expectations versus reality. The larger that gap can result in distress, okay? And then there's eustress, okay? And eustress is obviously seeing things for the whole and loving the whole, being grateful for the way things are. That is a alignment to eustress, and that's where we perceive challenge and support to be equal, and that enables us to grow and thrive. Okay, so stress is neither good or bad, right? It depends. It depends on your level of thinking, really. So let's get on to what you can do about it. So I wanted to share a quote before we talk about the next phase in terms of elevating your thinking. So this is a quote from Walt Disney, and it is, "The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing." So I want you to begin doing following this episode. and stop talking about how stressed you are or how disappointed you are with others. Or so it's the time to let go of that, to start implementing what you learn on Me and My Health Up, and to make a difference in the world. Okay, so in terms of the way we perceive things, is one of the things that we can actually control in our life. Okay, there's only three things that we can control: is our perceptions, our decisions, and our actions. Everything else just comes at us, either from other people or from the environment, and we need to be adaptive and responsive. And as I said, you want to be in a good, adaptive, responsive way so that you can make the most of whatever situation comes towards you. Okay, so you can be like, you may have a life-threatening situation come towards you. You want to be extremely adaptive in that situation and extremely quick to react and be able to react optimally to give the best chance of survival. Okay, when you're in a state of distress, you'll have a slower response time and your body won't be in a state to optimize your escape. Okay, so there's only three things that we can control. It's your perceptions, your decisions, and your actions. Okay, so let's start with our perceptions. Okay, so now you may have heard of this or may not have heard of this, but you've probably seen it in action. You've probably experienced it in your own life. And essentially, you and someone else may see the same event and walk away with a totally different perception, right? So we see the world through our own filters, through our own lenses, and our lenses are created as we go through life. We create different lenses based on our experiences. Okay, so we'll see events based on our prior experience with that event, or a similar experience with a similar event, or something like that. That's how we'll typically respond, is how we responded back when it happened earlier, or there could be triggers. So there could be an event that you had in your life that was extremely, or perceived extremely distressful at the time, but there's certain tastes or smells or sounds that go with that event that is then triggered when you're walking around. And so you get these triggers of that event that sends you in that frightened state or that scared state that you're in when you're a lot younger or many years ago. So essentially, all these events that come into our life, we form a perception, and that's based on our prior experiences. Okay, and those perceptions will be heightened when we perceive them as one-sided. Okay, so if we had a one-sided perception that was all bad and there was no good, then that is a strong emotion attached to that event, and therefore will be easily triggered. So essentially, when we experience something and it's got a strong emotion attached to it, that memory is stored in the hippocampus. And then when we filter through our senses as we go on in life, certain elements or senses will pick up on similarities, and you all of a sudden feel a bit uneasy or a bit nervous, or you just get a bit anxious and you think, why? You know, it's sort of nothing, but you subconsciously, through your senses, you've picked up on a sound or a smell or a taste or seen someone that's reminded you of someone in the past, and they obviously did something you perceived was extremely negative. Hence, that triggered a order one response, which is that fight or flight or freeze response. Okay, so you get that anxiousness, you get those butterflies in your tummy, you feel, oh, I can't digest that, it's not sitting well, I feel sick, and you got these adrenaline running through, you get a bit sweaty, you get very much anxious in terms of your thinking, and your mind's running away from you. Essentially, you've been triggered, okay, based on that past experience, and that was formed through a perception. So the work that I do with my clients helps resolve these past issues, okay, so that they're no longer triggered when they're going forward in life. It's not triggering a past event. Essentially, the work that I do with my clients through the Dietetic method essentially enables them to see the hidden order in what happened. because they perceived a imbalanced perspective, a one-sided perspective. What I do through questioning, it's just through simple questioning and holding them accountable, is essentially I enable them to get full consciousness of the event and to see the other side. And therefore, they can have a balanced perspective of the event and have gratitude and love for the event. Okay, so it's a fantastic tool, works really well. And this is a bit of an infomercial. I'm actually running a program next year, which you could be part of, which essentially teaches you the methodology on how to do this. And you can work through past issues so that you're no longer held back going forward. And so essentially the program I'm running next year will propel you towards what you want and to get more of what you want in terms of your aspirations, your goals, and live out your inspiration without your limiting beliefs or the past holding you back. And so I'm running this program next year, which is called the Resolution Solution. And it's essentially enabling you to achieve success from 2023 and beyond with being empowered with this technique in terms of how to balance your perspective of things that come your way. And you can have this heightened level of consciousness, whatever comes to you in the future. And so then you don't develop these strong emotion associations with events because you just you only saw one side of that event. And then that holds you back essentially. And it creates that distress and illness in the body. And so you'll generate health symptoms as a result of that. If you want more wellness and you want to be able to go forward and not be held back from the past, then this course, the Resolution Solution, the resolution is the perfect course for you. I'm running it next year. We start our first workshop in February. So please join me. But that's the end of the infomercial. Now we get back into the content, okay? So essentially, I just mentioned the perceptions and how a perception of the past can certainly be triggered in the future. And so when you perceive something, and this is the tip I'm going to share today, whenever you get an emotion, feeling, then you want to think, what's triggered that? Okay, so something's triggered that emotion. It may be a way in which someone said something to you, okay, and you perceive it as negative, or you dislike that person for that action, right? You're only seeing one side of that person. So in that moment, I want you to then think about when you actually did that to someone else, okay? So I want you to have that reflective awareness and own what you're disliking that other person doing to you, own it in yourself, because that will not only help you love both sides of the other person, it will help you love both sides of yourself. What you project in terms of what you see, it's called deflective awareness, is essentially what you are disowning in yourself, you're projecting onto someone else. So you own it in yourself, it will no longer be a trigger in the future when that behavior is done to you. Essentially, you think, well, I do that just as much as they do. Okay, we both own it, we both love it. We're human, okay? And we're going to love each other for who we are. So whenever something irritates you or frustrates you from another person, I want you to have that reflective awareness and say, when have I done exactly that? And for example, like when a car cuts in front of you, you want to then reflect on the time that you cut in front of another car, okay? And own it. Own that trait that you're disowning, or own that behavior that you're disliking about yourself, that you then have that deflective awareness from someone else onto you and think, I don't like this about you, or why did you do this to me, and get angry at it, when you can actually just sort of laugh at it and think, oh yeah, I do that too, and then it doesn't result in an emotional distress. Otherwise, you get anger, and anger brings on essentially our stress response. Okay, and then that stress response brings on illness. As I said, it results in distress and brings on illness and accelerates aging. I'm sure you don't want that accelerated aging. So essentially, having this balanced perspective and this self-awareness, self-reflection will enable you to elevate your thinking to that order two thinking, which is thrival, okay? Thrival, okay? I'm still digesting lunch. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot and I'm probably not breathing the amount of air that I need to in order to perform. So anyway, bear with me. But essentially, order two thinking is that thrival state of thinking, okay? And that's essentially when you ask that question of yourself, when have I done what that person's just done to me, and own it in yourself equally to how much you perceive them doing it, then it's neutral. There's no emotional charge. It results in eustress, completely balanced autonomics, and more resilience. Okay, I'm thinking you can sort of get the picture. So essentially, the technique that I'm sharing with you today, which I'll be sharing in a much more detail during the Resolution Solution program next year, beginning in February. And the early bird offer is still available, 37% off the program next year, is that essentially you just ask better questions. Okay, you're asking these questions of yourself, and you're getting a higher level of awareness through asking the questions, because the questions are bringing out the other side that you're unconscious of. Okay. And it's bringing it to your consciousness so that you have full consciousness of the situation, full consciousness of the person, and full consciousness of who they are, as opposed to just seeing one side of them and loving one side and then wanting the other side to go away. And that other side is causing you distress. Well, that's just aging you as a result of not owning it in yourself. And so, yes, we all do these things, okay? We're human. We are all human, and we have both sides of us, where we are nice and we're mean, where we experience pleasure and we experience pain, okay? When we're angry, there'll be times where you're angry, but there'll be times when you're chilled and relaxed, and so essentially we need to own both sides of us and love the whole us. And then we have a better love of others because we're loving ourselves. We're owning the full us as opposed to one-sided us, and we're not projecting it onto others. Okay, so that self-awareness, that self-reflection awareness is really helpful. Okay, so that's essentially anything that frustrates you about someone else. I want you to look at when you've done it and own it in yourself, and keep looking at it till it's equivalent to them doing it to you, and there's no emotion associated with whatever event or whatever action they did to you. Okay, it's completely neutral, and you feel that sense of emotional shift, and it's a tear of gratitude that you should feel within, that it's expressed visually through tears, but it's a tear of gratitude because you can see, essentially you're loving another part of you that you disowned prior, and you're loving another part of them that you were disliking or despising or resenting about that other person. So again, you'll increase the love and connection between you and other, and increase the love and connection with you. Okay, so it's fantastic. It's awesome. And then the second thing we control is our decisions. So obviously, if we elevate our thinking in that moment, right, rather than having a one-sided perspective, is that, oh, why do people always cut me off in traffic and all this, and it's a danger to me and all this sort of stuff, and sort of projecting what you do onto others, and not owning it within yourself. Essentially, that results in anger and frustration. Okay, and as I said, that anger and frustration you'll do something that is typically something that you probably regret afterwards for doing. You may get out of your car, you may go up and thump the windscreen, or you may end up in a fight, or you may then take your anger out on someone else, a loved one in the car, because you're taking your frustration out on them. And so that's the decision you've made as a result of that perception of that person is bad because they cut me off, or essentially, I don't like what I'm seeing. It's that is bad. They shouldn't do that. Or so when you're seeing that one-sided perspective resulting in an emotional response, then that emotional response will drive the decision and without much thought. And so essentially, you'll be acting without thinking. And that acting without thinking is an emotional response. And that emotional response is often something you think, oh, why did I do that to my son? I was angry, but my son didn't deserve me to yell at him or her just because this driver cut me off. I think you get where I'm coming from, and you can probably relate to what I'm talking about in your own life, where you've taken out some frustration on someone else, okay, because you've got a one-sided perspective of someone or some event, and then that frustrated you, and then you took that frustration out on a loved one that you're thinking, well, why did I take it out on them? And again, you're thinking, oh, and then you start self-depreciating yourself, thinking, oh, you're always mean. Well, yes, but you're also nice as well, and you need to love both sides of you. You need to love the side that we know when you're mean, and love you when you're nice. Nice and mean go together. It's loving the whole, okay, and it's being grateful for the whole. And so when you're in that elevated thinking, that order two thinking, that thrival thinking, essentially you'll be thinking before making a decision to act emotionally, right? So you can see how now our perceptions affect our decisions, which affect our actions. So, and therefore we can intercept this in terms of, having the most thought out and the most thoughtful response, most thoughtful action by changing our perceptions before we have that emotional reaction. Okay, so we can interject or interrupt by asking that question of ourselves: when have I done what this person's doing to me? And owning it within ourselves. The other thing that can also help in terms of question you ask yourself is how what they're doing to me is serving me in terms of what I value. So is that person cutting you off making you more aware that of the dangers of driving, and you're no longer oblivious or no longer taking for granted driving? You then think, yes, this is a serious matter. I need to be very alert. And so therefore it makes you a more conscious driver, a better driver, as a result of seeing irresponsible, actions from others that you also do. I'm sure you've done at some point in your life or something similar to someone else. And so that, again, you've perceived that person essentially violating your safety or your margin of safety. Then you want to have, how's that benefited me? Well, it's made me more safety conscious. So therefore, when I drive, I'm going to allow bigger gaps. Okay. So it's no longer an issue if they cut in front of me, because I've got such a gap, I can actually brake and respond accordingly. So then how has that served you in your highest value, which is your family safety? Well, it's maybe more a conscious driver. I'm now going to allow a larger gap between me and the vehicle in front of me. Okay. So if someone cuts in front of me, I can respond and brake accordingly. So it's going to bring more consciousness, awareness to your driving. Then you're thinking, okay, I want to be more safe when I'm driving because I want to make sure my family's safe with me whilst I'm driving, because this is a very, you're very exposed when you're driving. You're driving at high speeds, and the accidents, when you have an accident, are quite, serious because of the velocities involved. So then you might then think, well, therefore I'm not going to respond to messages when I'm driving because I want full consciousness. I want I want to have the optimum safety of my family. So therefore that's another benefit of that person cutting me off, is now I'm going to then be conscious that I'm going to focus on my driver and not be distracted by devices that are, when messages are coming through. Okay. So then if you start looking at the benefits of that driver doing the action they did and how it served you and your highest value, which is protecting your family and the safety of your family, then it starts to reduce the emotion, and then you'll feel calm again. So in that moment, so rather than get frustrated, ask yourself the question. Again, the first question I mentioned to you is, when have you done what they just done to you? It can be exactly the same or similar. You may not have actually cut a driver off, or you may be too proud to admit that you've cut a driver off, but a similar action that's resulted in the consequence that you're concerned about, which is the safety of your family. So it may have been where someone else did an action towards you where you felt it violated the protection or the safety of your family, whatever that may be. And when have you done a similar act? Okay. So ask that question of yourself, and it'll elevate your thinking. it will calm your emotional response. So you'll calm your nervous system. It will get balanced again, and you'll have gratitude for what that person did, because it's now made you a more conscious driver and more aware, and you're not taking for granted when you're driving. You have more conscious awareness. You're accepting more responsibility. So it's increased your awareness. So you're thinking, well, thank you, driver. That is really made me more safety conscious when I'm driving, and I'm going to drive with a higher level of safety consciousness, such as I'm not going to look at messages. I'm not going to be distracted when I'm driving. I'm going to focus on driving and be a better driver. I'm going to allow a larger gap between me and the driver in front of me. Okay, so that's essentially seeing gratitude for what's just happened, as opposed to labeling that person as an idiot or as an irresponsible driver. You're not labeling that person, or you're not labeling the fact that they've cut in front of you as that's, extremely dangerous to me. You've actually then seen what's happened, and now as a result of that, taken a higher level of consciousness and got full awareness of it, and seeing how it's going to serve you going forward in your life. It's going to make you a more consciously safety conscious driver, essentially. Okay, so now you can see how we can shift our perceptions, which enables us to make a higher level of thinking so more balanced decision making, so more strategic in our decision making. We can weigh up the pros and cons when we have a balanced perspective, and essentially make a better decision going forward in terms of the actions that we then play out. So then we don't yell at our kid and take them out, take out the frustration on our children in the back seat because someone's cut us off, or we don't take it out on the person who's cut us off. Essentially, that's just creating distress in you, creates illness, ages you, and doesn't really add any value other than you get frustrated. And then you start thinking about that all the way home, and then you take that frustration home and into your evening, and then you may medicate in order, such as drinking alcohol, in order to calm your nervous system, and then it just transpires and compounds into something more distressful. Whereas if we, in that moment, ask the question of ourselves, how is what they've just done to me serving me in what's important to me in my life? If you can answer that question and answer it until you can then say, thank you for doing that, driver, or thank you for cutting me off, do it and, answer that question that many times until you can see the gratitude in what's just happened. Then you'll calm your nervous system. You won't be angry, and you won't be angry when you get home, and you won't need copious amounts of alcohol to calm down. You'll be able to have a relaxing evening and have a good night's sleep. Okay, so I think you can see the three things we can control is our perceptions, which then translate into decisions. So if we balance our perceptions, we have more thoughtful decisions, which result in more thoughtful actions. Okay, so I hope that's been of service to you. I hope that's really helped you in terms of seeing things for as they are and seeing a balanced perspective as opposed to a one-sided perspective. And that's the best way to get resilience in your body and have a high heart rate variability and be more responsive and more adaptive to change, is essentially balancing our perceptions. And in order to balance our perceptions, ask questions. The better the questions we ask, the better the quality of life. So the two questions I shared with you today is, when have I done what I dislike that other person doing to me in my life? Okay, so you ask that, and when have you done it? When have you done it? When have you done it? Where were you? What did you do? Who you're with? So really go to the moment when you actually did it, and then actually own it, and then say, yes, yeah, I do that. And then keep listing it until you balance that a charge, that emotional charge, until you actually can say, I do it as much as that person does it to me. And then you can be grateful for that person being in your life, because you love them unconditionally. You love both sides of them. You love both sides of yourself. And it's the same as that action that's been done towards you that you dislike, despise, or resent. Essentially, how is that serving you in what's important to you in your life? Okay. and then keep listing. How is that benefiting you? How's that serving you? And keep listing them out until you think, I can see the hidden order in what's happened and why that event came into my life. I can see the complete order, and I have full consciousness of that event. I see both sides of it, and I'm grateful for that event. Okay, that's essentially when you've balanced your perceptions, and having that balanced perception gives you more resilience. You'll be in that state of eustress and be more adaptive to the stresses in life. So I hope that's helped for you. If you want additional help, please join the Resolution Solution program that's starting next year. As I said, the early bird offer is still available. So jump on the early bird before the 31st of December. It expires on the 31st of December. It's a 37% discount off the year-long program. And you will learn these techniques and master these techniques throughout the year, so that you can essentially have more eustress and be more adaptive and be more resilient in 2023. And if you found this episode of interest and intriguing and benefit to you, please share it with other people that you think could benefit from listening to this episode. Please spread the word. As you know, I'm all about enhancing and enlightening the well-being of others. Thank you for listening.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.